Welcome back. Today we will be talking about business approaches in the current high-tech industry and possible analogies to previous business approaches from previous industrial changes. This is Dr. Louise Perkins. American industry after World War II was almost the only industry left standing. But as the other countries recovered from the war, America has faced increased foreign competition. There is also a belief that there has been declining innovation within the United States. This is partly based on the fact that from the 70s, corporations had reduced their research and that China and the European Union stepped up their research efforts for corporations at the same time. I'm not convinced that this is a valid state, but it is clear in the literature that many are. So to increase this innovation, as we're falling behind, the scenario goes, companies are investing in university research. This is true. They are investing in university research. They are also trying to rebuild their own industrial research labs, which had been the key to innovation previously. So I want to talk about a large change in the United States corporate policies from the 1800s. And I want to take it from the traditional ones that are always discussed, the robber barons. You will probably remember that Vanderbilt, I use the word bribed, but he was paid by government subsidized shipping not to compete with his company. What he did was build a transportation system that was very inexpensive and for which he could charge a lot less money. Competing companies had government subsidized grants and charged a lot more money and said they still weren't making any money. So in some sense, he demonstrated that it was possible to be a much more efficient company and to make money without the government subsidies. The companies that were getting the government subsidies liked them, so they paid Vanderbilt not to compete with them. The idea of a robber baron was a corporation that was designed or that promulgated a business plan that crushed competitors. They also rigged the market so that they were in their favor, like Vanderbilt. And they also took advantage of corrupt government to bribe their way into profit. One of these examples is typically taken from the Transcontinental Railroad. While the Transcontinental Railroad was making an enormous amount of money, the United States was in a deep depression. And one of the quotes from the time is that the American dream of abundant prosperity for all was a hopeless myth. I hope you can recognize that that's similar to what some people say today. The Transcontinental Railroad was a very large investment, built very quickly and very efficiently by people from the West. And quite frankly, I think it was a brilliant piece of work. In economic coursework in colleges, and in research papers on the subject, it is still, to this day, strongly disputed whether this was robber barons capturing the market or whether this was just really good for the country. The big three robber barons were Mellon, Carnegie, and Rockefeller. And they were considered to be immoral, unethical, and unjust. They were considered to be willing to do anything to be able to achieve their millions. Now, don't forget, you might not know, Carnegie built a library in every single town in the country. That was his way of his corporation giving back. So Carnegie libraries are very famous. Rockefeller amassed a fortune, but then built a beautiful art museum where his money was spent to buy art for the art museum. Of course, Carnegie Mellon University also was funded. So in response to these corporations kind of running amok, and they did in some sense, the United States government in 1890 passed the Sherman Antitrust Act. This act was to protect trade and commerce against unlawful restraints and monopolies. One of the people that they first charged was Standard Oil. Standard Oil had bought up most of the oil refineries. They had a monopoly with the oil refineries, and they were using that monopoly to force the people who had to get their oil from them or from whom they had to buy oil to cooperate with them in setting prices. So sometimes they would underprice things so much that they were losing money, but they had deep pockets. They could underprice it to force other people out of business. Then they would be the only ones in business, and then they could raise the prices and make back what they lost and more. They were also known to threaten the companies they worked with I won't sell you any gas, you won't be able to survive if you don't cooperate with me type of things. Again, the monopoly was oil refining, and they were trying to force gas stations and drilling places to deal with them and only them. Taft, you guys know that President Taft was later on the Supreme Court. He did not agree with the course case, but the course case broke up Standard Oil into a bunch of smaller companies to be able to avoid the monopoly. Another company prosecuted under the Sherman Antitrust Act was the American Tobacco Company. They had a monopoly on tobacco. The courts split it into 4 companies: American Tobacco, R.J. Reynolds, Liggett, and Myers. You guys probably don't remember these. I hope you don't remember cigarette companies, but they used to advertise when I was a kid. And Lorillard. All they did was change the monopoly to an oligopoly, and 2 decades later, they were forced to sue them again. Another more interesting example, and maybe more related to high tech, is the Federal Baseball League. They sued because they were not they were being held out of a competition with the baseball leagues that exist today. The courts ruled that this was not a case that fell under the antitrust laws, that the antitrust laws did not apply to baseball because it was not interstate commerce. What they were selling was an exhibition of a sport. In 1914, the Clayton Antitrust Act was passed to add teeth to the anti-competition clause. So we have more than 100-year-old congressional laws that are trying to avoid companies controlling all of something, having a monopoly on something. And these laws reflect corporate distrust of collaboration. They felt that when you allow companies to cooperate, like the 4 tobacco companies, it'll lead to domination of the market, which will squish the opportunity for innovation. So the purpose for these laws was to support entrepreneurs so that those entrepreneurs could add innovative software. You can see my bent here. Sorry about that. Innovative approaches that could improve the products being sold by that company. What they really did here in these antitrust acts is to conclude it was unethical for companies to band together to corner a market. I'm going to give you another example from more recently. In the 1970s, foreign competition, especially from Japan and Germany, increased significantly, and the United States was worried about their ability to compete in the automobile industry, in the semiconductor industry, and in consumer electronics, among others. In one example of a technology case with older technology, Continental TV sued GTE Sylvania. Sylvania was losing money, or at least losing some of its profits that it had previously experienced. So it was trying to limit the number of stores in a particular area. It was moving to a franchise approach, and it was trying to require franchises in order to sell their products. So you might have been carrying Sylvania TVs, but all of a sudden, if you wanted to sell them, you had to buy a franchise, or at least be given a franchise. And if you didn't have that franchise, you were no longer allowed to sell their products, even if you were selling them before. Continental TV was denied such a franchise, and they sued Sylvania. This phrase, rule of reason, is enormously important in antitrust. The courts concluded that the rule of reason in the actual antitrust laws should be more broadly applied. And the courts decided that Sylvania, in their business model, had sufficient reason to move to this franchise approach. So they decided this model was not anti-competitive. Instead, the franchise model was allowing Sylvania to stay viable when otherwise they could have lost their business. So even though the franchise label approach appears monopolistic, it was actually the opposite. It was there simply to survive. When Reagan was president, the federal government did not prosecute very many antitrust cases, and this is a time frame when a lot of tech companies are emerging. During this time, many mergers of larger corporations took place and made mega corporations. There are many mega corporations right now. They also sold an awfully lot of franchises, like the Sylvania model, that had limits on locality. In 1987, because of this moratorium on antitrust litigation, an antitrust policy institute was established by Ralph Nader and Frederick Firth. Both were antitrust attorneys. Ralph Nader is known for Consumer Reports, and Frederick Firth, believe it or not, was an antitrust attorney and a vintner, and I think he's more known for his wine. They felt that the United States government should enforce the laws more strictly, that the growth of the new industries were looking like monopolies, but the federal government wasn't stopping it. Since some of those industries that were growing at this time were in fact high-tech industries, that's where we would like to bring this conversation. I'm going to pause now and start a new video.